Welcome back to the Business Book Challenge. My name is Maria Medina. I am your business and networking coach. And today we're going to be talking about crucial conversations. I'd like to welcome my guest, Sheryl. Sheryl, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello. So grateful to be here. Thank you for having me on. So my name is Sheryl Green. I am a mental health speaker and boundary expert. And I'm the author of You Had Me at No, How Setting Healthy Boundaries Helps Banish Burnout, Repair Relationships, and Save Your Sanity. And as you can tell, I'm also kind of a plant and sloth fanatic.
I love that. I didn't notice the sloth before, but I see it now. My wife and I actually went to a sloth sanctuary in Oregon. It was really educational. Not that we want to start now a sloth conversation, but
I'm always hoping for that, though.
Okay. All right. Good. In the next video, please join us. But thank you so much for coming on here. We connected on Facebook. Was that right?
I think so. Yeah.
We connected on a Facebook group. I made a call out for speakers and people that wanted to join, and you recommended this book. So thank you for recommending it. It was a great read for me in particular, because I do get anxious about those really important conversations. And I am lucky enough that I do have somebody I can bounce those ideas off of, which is my wife. I say, hey, this is a conversation. It's a tough conversation that I have to have. What do you think? This is what I'm thinking about bringing forward. Is there anything that I should see from the other side? And just having that conversation really helps to bounce some ideas, because a lot of the time, and this book talks about it, you go in with a lot of emotion and you just get stuck on what's in it for you, and you're trying to get something out for you, and you forget to listen to the other person, and you're just listening to answer rather than listening to actually pay attention to what they're saying. So one of the questions that I did have for you as an emotional coach was, how do you go about separating those emotions of what you're feeling, what you're trying to get out of the conversation, to really go in to that conversation that may require a compromise at the end of it?
I think, honestly, knowing what you want, knowing what you actually want to get out of this, and being really clear about that before you even start the conversation. And I will admit I am petty in this way sometimes, but sometimes you go into a conversation and you literally just want to make the other person look bad. You're pissed, you're not happy at how something has gone, and you just want to make them look ridiculous. And while there may be momentary satisfaction for that, in the long run, that's going to do a lot of damage to the relationship, to how people see you. Because nobody wants to have conversations with somebody who is known for making them look stupid. So I think really going into that and saying, like, hey, what do I want to get out of this? Is my end goal to improve this relationship? Is my end goal to come to an agreement on something, to compromise on something, to finish a project or create something? So understanding that. And I would say the other thing is really separating your emotion from what's going on, and doing that by identifying what is the story and what is the actual fact. A lot of times, like, something happens and that happens. There's no question about it. And if you're in a work situation, let's say someone misses a deadline. There is no question. There is fact around the person has missed the deadline. Deadline is passed. It is not completed. That is fact. However, what's the story that we're bringing up around it? And as a leader, as a manager, you could be saying something like, well, that person's just out to get me, or I'm not a good manager, or they don't care about their job. They're no good. And you can tell that that story is bubbling up because there's emotion around it. So really identifying where are those differences, and what is the fact that we can all agree on, and then where am I going from there to my emotional states?
I like the example that you used with, going in, maybe somebody has upset you or they've made you look bad. So now you want to go in and make them look bad, and sort of even
The score.
the score. And you're not thinking about the bigger picture. And you're also not thinking or making yourself look at what can I control and what can't I control? What is the outcome that I want by making them look bad? Am I ultimately making them look bad because I want them to get fired? Is that actually going to happen? So that's that story. What is the outcome that I want from this conversation? What emotions am I attaching them? Did they actually deliberately make me look bad? Or can we get to the root of why this happened, why I'm feeling what I'm feeling, so we can avoid it in the future and not go for that eye for an eye scenario, which is often hard to do when you're emotional, because somebody makes you look bad, you want to make them look bad back, or things like that do happen in the workplace. And that's easy enough to have a conversation when somebody is willing to have the conversation with you and they're open and they're vulnerable, and you've set that space, which we'll talk about trust in a little bit, where you're comfortable in sharing, and so are they, whether it's just the two of you or in front of the team and in front of other people's, potentially your boss. But the book talks about listening to those cues and paying close attention. How do you do that when maybe the trust isn't there, or it hasn't been built yet, or it's been even broken? How do you look out for different cues as to maybe they're hesitant when they're having that conversation for you, they're pulling back, they're holding something back? What can you look out for when the conversation isn't as open as it could be?
I feel like before we even get to that, we have to state that if someone comes to you with something that's bothering them and you go insane, they're never coming to you again. Trust is broken. They know that no good is going to come from having a crucial conversation. And that's one of the big things that they say in here, is that you have to believe that something positive is going to come out of it, or there's no point in having it in the first place, and the resentment just builds. And so years ago, I worked with an animal rescue, and I built up every ounce of strength I had to go to my boss and tell her that something is bothering me, that I didn't like how something was done. And she went ballistic. Had to be talked off the ledge by a coworker so she didn't fire me on the spot. And it was like, that trained me to never again go to her. So I feel like people need to realize just how important that initial conversation is. Because if you do have that reaction, if you do have a negative reaction, then immediately you're going to have to go to rebuilding trust, because it has been absolutely broken. So I feel like I have to preface it with saying that, but be prepared to listen to what they're saying, to not cut them off, to not defend yourself. Be prepared to see their physical cues. What is their body telling you that maybe their mouth is not? And my husband and I went to our favorite barbecue place a few weeks ago. We love it. They're wonderful. This was just a terrible night. Just everything was dried out. Everything was overcooked. It was horrible. We sent it back. We got it. They remade it. It was still awful. So when the waitress came over at the end of the meal, the entire table was covered in uneaten food. And she was like, "Do you want boxes?" And we were like, "No." She's like, "Oh, did you like it?" And we were like, "No, it was terrible." And she had this huge smile on her face. And she's just like plastered, like, "Oh." And we're like, "No, we're serious." But she wasn't picking up on what we were saying. And we're watching her reaction, which was just like blatant, "I'm not listening to you, and whatever you're saying doesn't matter." So, man, pay attention to those physical, nonverbal cues, and probe a little bit. A lot of times people are going to say something like, "Oh, I'm fine. It's fine. It's not an issue. Whatever. It doesn't bother me." Never in the history of fine has anything actually been fine. So probe a little bit. Ask them how they're feeling. Tell them how you are seeing it. You're like, "Oh, I hear you saying that everything is okay, but your facial expressions and your body language lead me to believe that something is actually wrong." And then you can repeat back to them, "What did they say? This is what I heard you say, but I wonder if it's actually bothering you that." Give a couple of examples. "Oh, I wonder if this is bothering you. I wonder if this is." And eventually they're going to probably react and go, "Right, you know what? That actually is bothering me a little bit." Now you have the basis for a conversation.
We had this type of conversation when we were reviewing the book Never Split the Difference, where you want to get additional information from a person that's not willing to give it. So that's actually another book that I would recommend people to read if they're trying to get additional information from people that are not willing, or they feel vulnerable sharing those issues because they don't feel, maybe they have experience in the past, like yourself with a nonprofit. And I was going to say, nonprofit is one of those worlds where the emotion really is heightened, because a lot of these people, they're in it for the heart, they're in it for that mission, and separating, hey, this is going wrong with, but I'm doing this with love, is very hard when it comes to the nonprofit world. And we talk about coaching questions like, and what else? Is there anything else that you would like to share with me? But I like the idea of giving them examples and making some assumptions, just to say, hey, I think in a person in your situation could be bothered by A, B, C, or D. Are you bothered by any of these? Please share. This is a safe space for you. So how do you go about building or even rebuilding that trust? Let's say in the scenario of you, could that boss have done anything to rebuild that trust with you after going ballistic?
I think so. I think in this situation, there's always an opportunity to be honest and be vulnerable and be apologetic, and to say, you know what, while I may not have agreed with what you have said, with what you said, I respect your bravery in coming to me and being willing to say that. I appreciate the fact that you were comfortable enough being open with me, and I'm sorry that I basically ruined that. And I think sometimes we do have to fall on the sword and just be like, I screwed up. It happens to all of us. So if you approach it from that, I realize I did something wrong in the past and it's going to be different going forward, then I think you can absolutely rebuild that trust and have those conversations moving forward, which are only going to improve the relationship. If people aren't talking to you, it doesn't mean they're not talking. They're just going to other people, and that's going to make things worse.
And I think you need a little bit of that vulnerability and admitting mistakes. And for example, in the example of your waitress, you could have easily said, I'm so sorry. I've been dealing with complaints all day. I wasn't listening to what you're saying. What would you like me to, I know your regulars, what would you like me to do in order to rectify this? And you get a lot of that in the hospitality industry, where you have to deal with things with a smile, and you can deal with a complaint still with a smile and still listening.
Yes. Absolutely. And you can completely change the attitude of the whole situation just by listening and being empathetic.
Agreed. And as we're having these conversations, I know we're often making assumptions. Like, I'll be making my own assumptions based on my experiences of what they're saying. And I'm having internal dialogue. How can I often find ways to disengage that or truly listen? How can I engage in that active listening so I'm truly seeing where this other person's coming from?
I think identifying, being really cognizant of what you're bringing to the table. So, do you have some preconceived attitudes that are negative? Does the person you're talking to remind you of someone that you've had problems with in the past? Anybody with mommy issues or daddy issues, they go into a new situation, a relationship, a work situation, and they are bringing all of that baggage with them. So sitting back and going, hold on, I have to be really careful. This person reminds me of whoever in my past. They're not them. So let me let go of that baggage just for a little while. You can pick it back up at the door. But they remind you of someone. Have you had a similar situation in the past? Again, just like I said, when I go into future conversations, I'm bringing that with me. I am. I tried to speak up once and holy hell, this could end badly. So realizing in the moment, like, what am I bringing with me? And being conscious of, can I put that down just for a little while? Can I realize that this situation stands on its own and this person is a completely different person than I've ever dealt with before? I think that that's the best way to just be aware, and you can't get rid of something if you're not aware of it.
And I think going into conversations with that mindful state of mind, where if you're analyzing already, hey, what do I want to get out of this conversation? And then is there anything that I'm already going in charged with that I should be mindful about so that I can deal with it? So I can use, and this book shows a very good, the state framework that they utilize in order to communicate more effectively during the crucial conversations. And as I mentioned previously, that comes in very handy when somebody else is willing to not necessarily follow the framework themselves, but communicate effectively with you and bring that vulnerability in that conversation and they want to move forward. Are there certain questions that we can integrate or use in order to encourage other people that we're having a conversation with to use that same state framework?
Yeah, so the question that I absolutely loved from the book was, how could a reasonable person come to this conclusion? And I loved that so much because, we go into this, and again, we're going through these stories, and the other person has their own stories. And we kind of get into the mindset of everybody's out to get us, everybody's out to screw us. But really, they're not. We're all just trying to survive another day. When you look at it from their point of view, and I don't think it said anything about putting yourself in their shoes, but like when you look at it from how they could come to this conclusion. Oh, if they're examining the facts, if they're now putting a story around it based on their knowledge, if they're coming to this conclusion, what is it that they're actually a reasonable person, and this makes sense to jump from here to there. So I think going in with that attitude of, they're not crazy, they're not evil, they're not out to get me, they're a reasonable person just like me who came to a conclusion. Let me see how they got there, and then let me explain where they went not wrong, but where they went off the tracks, and my side of the story. So I love that question.
That question really brought me back to when I was doing my training for my coaching certification. And they said, you need to go into the conversation knowing that the client is willing and able, and you're not trying to teach them something new or make them do something that is outside of what they're already capable of. And when you approach that conversation and you approach it with more, hey, this person is willing and able to do what it takes to achieve their goal. And all you're trying to do is make them realize that they are willing and able. And when you approach that conversation in that different way, it really brings more insight because it's coming from inside where you're pulling out what they need to do from inside of them already. And one of the things that is very similar with coaching and these crucial conversations is creating that sense of accountability and having some sort of action point at the end of the conversation. Hey, we had this conversation for this reason. This is the outcome, and this is how we're going to keep track of it. What do you do when you're finding it hard to create that action step at the end of it? Maybe the conversation has continued to stay heated. Maybe it's not going in the direction that you needed to. You need follow-up conversations. How do you try and stay on track for something like that?
So I loved how the book broke this down into, so first, you've got different ways that a decision can be made. And we often don't tell others how we're actually making that decision. So a leader comes into a boardroom, and they, oh, well, we're going to be, I don't know, buying a new building. I'm totally making this up. And there's different ways that they can approach that decision. They can just command it. They can make the decision by themselves. They can consult, and that's to get input from people, but ultimately it's still their decision. And then they could do a vote where everybody has a say, and then they could do a consensus where really everybody has to agree. So understanding, I think, that decision-making process is going to be really the first step. Once they've done that, and so everybody's been communicated with, they don't feel like, well, I gave my opinion and they just ignored it. So they don't feel like that, because that's going to damage accountability. If you feel like your input had no value, who cares what gets done? So if there is that decision, great. And then from there, we need to assign it. Who is doing what? When are they doing it by? And I have notes here. I keep looking over because I wanted to get their words right. So it was who does what, by when, and how will you follow up? And deciding that ahead of time, figuring out who is going to do everything, what exactly are they doing, when does it have to be done by, and what does the follow-up look like? Are they checking in with you? Are you just doing an audit at the end? How does that actually look? So I think when it comes to that accountability and moving people to action, it's all about clarity. It's all about being very clear and very obvious about who, what, where, when, and why, all the things. So just really communicating that what is the next step and who's doing it.
And I think that's a good way to avoid follow up conflict when you say, this is who's doing what when, and this is who's going to follow up. So expect that follow up, or expect that check in, or expect me to look at the workflow and make sure that you did send that email or complete that project. And having that clear communication and those clear expectations really clears up for any discrepancies or any issues that may come up in the future. And you can avoid further conflict by really making that crucial conversation in the first place very clear and sharing as much information as possible. We are out of time, Sheryl. I would love to continue to talk about this book with you, but thank you again for joining us here today. If anybody would like to carry on the conversation or has any follow-up questions, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
So you can find me on my website, SherylGreenSpeaks.com. That's Sheryl with an S. You can find a link to my book, and you can also download a How to Say No cheat sheet if you need a little bit of help in the conversation area.
Thank you so much for being here today, and don't forget to log in next week. Thank you.